the kickoff return for a touchdown's become a little bit of a dinosaur as well, where we don't see those anymore. And we all of a sudden there's some returns for touchdowns, and now, I think everybody's got their eyes glued on the TV.
Saints special teams coordinator, one of the most respected coaches in this league, and one of the main voices behind the NFL's new kickoff rule. It is Darren Rizzi. Darren, it's great to have you on. Thanks for taking the time.
I appreciate you guys having me. This is great, and always nice to talk football. You know that, so all good.
Absolutely. I mean, you've been in the league for a while, but I got to ask you this because this is probably been one of the more crazier off seasons for you. On a scale of like 1 to 10, how would you rate the hecticness of this off season for you?
Probably about a 10.5. And I say that because, this kickoff thing, which I know we're going to get into, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. And really from the day that the season ended, it's kind of been a work in progress. So I never really felt like, for the first time in a long time, it really ever had any downtime, which is good. I'm so happy that this kickoff has kind of gone the way it's going and at the moment. But it was a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of hard work, a lot of communication, and so leading up to the owners' meetings, right from the day the season ended, right through to when it got passed. It was really just a lot of hard work and effort. So yeah, hectic to say the least.
Yeah, so I do want to get into the kickoff rule first, and we'll talk a little bit about you as well, because like you were saying, I do believe that there will be fans who watch the Hall of Fame game in August, and eventually when the rest of the country starts watching Ravens Chiefs on Thursday night to open the season, who basically sit down on their couch and are like, what the heck is going on? I really believe that's going to happen because the morning shows, ESPN, we have not really talked much about how big and revolutionary this rule is. So let me just start off with this. I want to go behind the curtain of even making this happen. You say the Super Bowl ends, there are 13 kickoffs, all 13 are touchbacks. I know it didn't just start after the Super Bowl for you, but what's the process of getting all these special teams coordinators to unite and then put this rule together as an actual proposal?
No, it's a great question. To give you a little bit of history on everything. So back when the last kickoff got changed back in 2018, I believe, there was a group of coaches that went to New York and met with all the people in the NFL, and we made a lot of major changes. There was a spike in head injuries specifically, and concussions, and we were looking to make the place safer. So back in 2018, there was a group of us that kind of were at the forefront in giving the NFL some ideas, some feedback, and so fast forward a little bit, we've kind of been monitoring the kickoff play. Really from that time. So over the course of the last 6 years, the first couple of years, it was a resounding success. The first couple of years, the concussions went way down. The overall injuries went down, but specifically concussions. And then over the course of the last couple of years, there was a slight uptick. And so there was some concern again about the health and safety of the play. Now, couple that with, analytics. And I say that because if you look at the last couple of years, the touchback rate has gone sky high, the highest it's ever been in the NFL. And so what we were seeing was this really, really high touchback rate because analytically teams were fine with, taking the ball to 25-yard line, not taking the ball out of the end zone. And so there was a really, really high number of touchbacks. And then we added the fair catch last year, and that actually made the return rate the lowest it's ever been in the NFL. So that's where we were after the end of this 2023 season. We were at a point where we had the lowest return rate in literally the history of the league. So when you had there was 1,970 touchbacks, there was 92 fair catches. So we had over 2,000 non-plays, if you will. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where, that's kind of the background to how we got to this new revision of the kickoff rule. There was two major goals. One, the first and foremost was to make the play safer for the players, without a doubt. the second aspect, which is very important for the fans, coaches, players also, is to make the play more exciting. So you had the Super Bowl where there was 13 touchbacks, right? So that's a bathroom break for everybody, right? That's a chance to go get another beer out of the fridge. And, so we as coaches wanted to make the play a lot more relevant and couple that with making it safer. So that's kind of the background. And so myself and John Fossil from the Cowboys, we had a lot of discussions after the season because John and I, over the course of the last couple of years, have been really kind of paying attention and investigating the XFL kickoff. That's what everybody's comparing this, and that was kind of the I guess the foundation, if you will. Now John and I felt like there was a lot of good things with the play, but also we felt that there was a lot of things that were really not conducive to the NFL. And so I know that's a little bit of a long answer, but that's kind of how we got to this point. And so that's how this whole thing kind of started up and kind of kickstarted with John and I talking after the season, and then kind of going from there and coming up with what we thought was the best starting point, and then getting all of the special teams coaches together at a meeting in Indianapolis at the Combine. And that was a great meeting. We had all the coordinators, I think except for one, and about another 30 special teams assistants. So I think we had about 60 plus special teams coaches in the room for a few hours in Indianapolis, hashing it out, the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and that's kind of, we came out of that room with kind of a resounding, I want to say, support. That we really needed to make a change here, and that's kind of where we are right now.
I remember last year when the fair catch idea came up, and I think there were a lot of people who were against it. And of course, now coming up with this idea where everyone was involved probably helped. And really, like you were saying, the essence of the new kickoff rule is to increase returns while also reducing space and speed in the play. And the old kickoff rule caused too many injuries. The previous change basically made it a bathroom break, like you were saying. But I got to ask you, like when you guys were at the owners' meetings, for me, I was a bit surprised that it passed. And I know that you guys had to present the idea to Roger Goodell and the competition committee. Were you surprised that it passed? Because I'll tell you why. There was, for 4 or 5 years, they've been trying to pass this onside kick thing, 4th and 20, and it never got past the finish line. And then something this drastic passes in one offseason. Like, how did that even happen?
Again, I'll go back to the fact that I think that I'll start with the commissioner. The commissioner, Commissioner Goodell, has been very, very supportive of bringing the play back and making it more relevant and not making it ceremonial. I know that was very important to the commissioner. The commissioner also knew that myself, Coach John Fossil, and a bunch of the other coaches were working behind the scenes for the last few years to come up with the best option. So, I'm 100% sure that the commissioner knew this just wasn't like a fly by the seat of our pants and, hey, let's just throw this up against the wall and see if it sticks. It was one of those things where, okay, this has been thoroughly thought out. When the season ended this year, it was one of those kind of, with conversations with the league office between Troy Vincent, Commissioner Goodell, Dave Gardy, who at the time was with the league, just everybody. And then also with the health and safety people, Jeff Miller, everybody. It was an all-inclusive thing where, hey, it's time. We would really like the coaches to present us something at this point. And it's kind of like, all right, we're at a dead end at this point. So that's kind of I think that going into the owners' meetings, I know that, listen, I can't sit here and tell you that every single special teams coach was 100% behind the play. That wouldn't be an accurate statement. I think there's a lot of apprehension because there's a lot of guys that have been in the league for a long time, myself included, that don't like radical change, and I was one of those guys. But at the same time, there was also kind of that feeling out there that if we don't do something soon, that this play may become extinct. And we certainly don't want that. We want to keep the foot in the game, and those two factors: make it safer, make it more exciting. So, going into the owners' meetings, it was really interesting. we definitely had a lot. John and I and Richard Hightower was there with us as well from the Bears. We fielded a lot of questions, a lot of difficult questions, quite frankly. Um, I think overall there was a lot of support for something. I think that there was some pushback about doing it so quickly. There were some teams and ownership and GMs and coaches that maybe wanted to do it just for the preseason. This has never been done before. Do we want to make a wholesale change? But I would be lying if I say we didn't get a ton of support from the league office. We really did. I think that was a big part of it. And I think that once everybody kind of heard, A to Z, we've tried to dot every I and cross every T, and this wasn't just a thing we thought up of overnight. Once we were able to explain it thoroughly, I think that we started to garner more support from everybody, and that's how the rule ended up getting voted through.
Yeah, I think there were only three teams that voted no on this, which is a big deal because usually some of these votes are way tighter. What would you say is the best case scenario with this, and I guess the worst case scenario? Because for now, this is a 1-year trial, then we'll meet again at next year's owners' meetings.
Well, I think the best case scenario is we come out of the season, the 2024 season, and we look back and we look at the injury data, and we want the injury rate to resemble more of a scrimmage play, right? So, when we meet with BioCore and the NFL, health and safety people, Dr. Sills, Jeff Miller, the big thing for us is the injury rate. There's a rate of injury on a regular offensive defensive play, and then there's a rate of injury on a kickoff play, and then there's a rate of injury on a punt play. And right now, we want to see this kickoff injury rate come down more towards, a scrimmage play. Is it going to be exactly the same? No, but obviously arrowed down. So I think that would be number one. Number two would be, we see that return rate go up. We add excitement. The start drive is better. The kickoff return for a touchdown's become a little bit of a dinosaur as well, where we don't see those anymore. And we all of a sudden there's some returns for touchdowns, and now I think everybody's got their eyes glued on the TV. I think some of our favorite players are in the game at the end of the game. The Tyreek Hills and the Alvin Kamaras and the those exciting guys that maybe some teams are saying, you know what, this is a much safer play. We throw these guys back there. Maybe not every time, but and I think if the fans look back at it and say, wow, that was exciting, and the NFL can look at it and say, wow, this is much safer, I think that's the best case scenario for everybody. That return rate, goes up, the touchback rate comes down, and we've added some excitement to the play, and we can look back and say, hey, we have created a safer model for sure. The worst case scenario, I don't know. The worst case scenario is probably if the injury rate doesn't go down, like we think it will, or if teams at some point decide that we're just going to kick touchbacks again. But keep in mind with the new rule, if you do that, you're giving your opponent the ball at the 30-yard line. So it is a big difference. So if you go through the entire year and you give your opponent the ball at the 30-yard line, you are obviously analytically, statistically going to give up more points. And so that would probably be the worst case scenario if we don't really see the play become as safe as we think it's going to be.
Is there a concern that this could lead to too much scoring, and as a result, by like weeks 7, 8, 9, some teams are like, you know what, heck with it, let's just kick it out of the end zone, give it to them at the 30?
That could happen. I mean, again, we're talking about something that's never been done before, because I know everybody wants to compare it to the XFL, but it's just not the XFL play.
It's not the same.
It's got so many different intricacies. Is that a possibility? Listen, no doubt. I think that there's some teams out there, I could probably tell you which teams they are, that are going to make you return the ball every time, that feel very good about their core players, that feel very good about their coverage. And then there's going to be some teams out there that are going to be like, if we're playing against, certain returner, these all pro and Pro Bowl type returner guys that, maybe that particular week. Now, do I personally think that's going to happen every single time? I don't. So I definitely think that I would be shocked if I really would be floored if our return rate doesn't go up, and then hopefully it goes up and we get it, at least north of 50%. That would be ideal in my mind.
Well, my prediction for all of this, just seeing how it hasn't gotten enough attention, is I think at the end of the Sunday games in week one, all the sports shows leading on Monday are going to be talking about the kickoff rule because we're either going to have a couple of teams mess up something that they were training the entire time and they haven't shown anybody, or there are going to be a couple of teams that do it so well that it becomes such a big topic. I think that's going to happen after the Sunday games of week one because, again, it's not getting as much attention. But the one thing I wanted to ask you about this as well is now that we're going into training camp and eventually the preseason, do you think teams are going to be trying to test some things out, or are they going to be hiding it for the regular season? How do you expect that to happen with the preseason?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I got to be honest with you. That's something that I'm kind of going back, jockeying back and forth and volleying back and forth in my mind as well. Is how much do we want to show? I think you're going to see very, very, very few touchbacks in the preseason because everybody kind of wants to have, it's like a science project, right? You're going to kind of test it out a little bit and check things out. But at the same time, how much do you want to tip your hand? How much do you want to show your scheme? Both sides, because there's going to be some kickoff. There's going to be much more kickoff scheme involved than people probably think, because everybody's so close to where the landing zone is, and then the same thing with returns. Now, the preseason, I think the fans, everyone needs to remember that you're still evaluating a lot of your young players. So it's really twofold. One, you want to be testing out the new model, right? And number two, you want to be evaluating possible guys, your late round picks, your undrafted free agent rookies, to see if they can make your team as a special teamer, if they're able to block, tackle, all those good things. So, from talking to my cohorts, I think that you're probably going to see maybe a few more guys on there in the preseason than you might normally see. Some of the core players, you think of some of the best core players in our league. Well, they've never done this before, ever. So it's not like I'll use my own example. I'll use JT Gray, right? JT Gray is a Pro Bowl, an all pro core player. Well, if we were doing regular, the old school kick return, I don't need to see JT Gray do that in the preseason. I already know what he is, but he's going to want to take reps at the new model. So guys like him, you may actually see getting mixed in a little bit more than you might. So listen, I know you talk about week one. I can't wait to see the preseason week one because we're going to have so much film to watch and everybody else doing it. And these are going to be really the first reps coming in on all the different possibilities and scenarios that can happen. So at the very least, it's going to be exciting, no question.
I'm definitely fascinated to see just how much is actually shown. And when week one comes, are we going to see some new stuff nobody's been ready for? Whether it's a knuckleball kick or whatever it is, somebody's going to do something weird. And then it's going to be like that. And we'll be like, what is going on? So that's very exciting. One more thing about this, the new rule could also lead to more kickers being involved in tackles. Do you feel like, first of all, that's accurate? Is that true or not? Because we've heard, I think the Browns mentioned they want their kickers involved in tackling drills. Justin Tucker, the Ravens kicker, said that he's adding weight. The Chiefs said they might use Justin Reed to kick off. Like, is that a real thing where teams have to be concerned for their kicker and punter who kicks off that he could possibly be involved in tackling, which could lead to potential injuries?
Yeah, listen, I think that's one of the things with the different our model, the hybrid model, as opposed to the XFL model. That's one of the things. I don't think there'll be as many kicker, tackling situations as there was in the XFL. Now, are there going to be more than there were on the old rules? Yes. But if you watch the XFL, one of the things it was a 10-on-10 play. It was 10 guys on the line, 10 guys on the line, and then if you really got through one level, you were out to the kicker. Well, because we're allowing in this model to have two returners back, and obviously the kickoff team is going to have 10 cover players, there's going to be that aspect of 10-on-9. And so you have the ability to maybe create some different levels in the coverage. So, to really simplify the answer, I do think that their number will go up from what the fans are used to. Do I think it's going to be where the XFL was? I don't. I know that there's been some talk about using a position player to kick off. There's a lot of pros and cons as it relates to that, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. So naturally, if you have a guy that's a position player that can really place the ball and kick the ball off well, you certainly gain a coverage guy. However, a lot of fans might not know the kicker cannot cross the 50-yard line until the ball is touched by the return team. So it's not like you can kick it and be down there past the coverage team and you can gain a huge advantage. The kicker, he's got to wait there at midfield. So if he does kick a high hang time kick, it's not like he can beat the ball down the field and you're going to gain this guy at full speed. He's going to have to slow down there a little bit at midfield. The other aspect is there is a huge risk reward with kicking the ball out of bounds or kicking the ball short of the landing zone. Short of the landing zone, if it doesn't get over the 20-yard line on a fly, that ball is treated like an out-of-bounds kickoff. So that ball is going to the 40-yard line. So listen, now if you have a position player that can do it, great. But as we've been practicing this in the spring, OTAs, minicamp, the location of the kickoffs is, in my opinion, is going to be a premium. So the hang times are relevant, but having kickers that can really locate the ball where you want them to kick it, wherever that is. If you want them to kick a line drive, if you want them to kick it down, inside the 5-yard line, if you want to play it into the corners, if you want to kick it in the middle of the field, whatever your design, whatever your scheme is, because what we've seen is, if you can catch that ball, on the run, on the move, and the kickoff team can't move till you touch it, the return team is at a really big advantage. And so that's why I don't know how many position players out there are going to be able to locate the ball exactly how the coaches are going to want them to locate it.
So as people realize here, there's a lot of strategy involved in here. Like you said, it is important you're able to land the ball anywhere from the goal line to the 20. And if you don't, there are consequences. I got to ask you this because, Mike Tannenbaum has told me this a lot, that he believes special teams coordinators deserve more attention as head coach candidates. And every year we hear about OCs and DCs who are candidates whenever teams have openings. And I feel like this new rule, and you tell me if you agree with this or not, if it does become a long-term change, could it maybe open the door for more special team coordinators to become head coach candidates now that there's more of an emphasis and importance on your role as coaches in the public eye, not just, in the building?
Well, listen, I agree with Mike. In my opinion, my humble opinion, I think that there should be more special teams coaches that are candidates for head jobs. Where it's the group in the NFL that other than the head coach that really is dealing with the entire roster. You're dealing with the entire team. You're working with everybody. There's a lot of similarities for special teams coaches as it relates to what the head coach is tasked with. Do I think that this new rule could certainly help, highlight and spotlight some really good special teams coaches? I do, because I think you're going to find out early on, who's kind of grasped this thing and who's running with it, and it can become a really big deal. But listen, I think there's a number of really, really good special teams coaches in our league that would really be really good head coaches, and this could just be another. This is a play. The last 3 or 4 years, no one's talking about the kickoff return. Almost, like I said, it was a dying play, and we feel like we've revived it. So this could even, like I said, make some other coaches come to the forefront. So I do believe that. I do think that you're going to see the teams that are doing it the best. Those coaches are going to quickly, get highlighted and get a lot of attention.
I believe so too. I mean, I've said this before. I think I've posted about it, but whenever we're going to see 3 or 4 teams distance themselves as really good on returning and in defending the play, we're going to hear those special team coordinators more when it comes to people writing about them or talking about them on television or whatever it is. Like, I just go back to the year where Rich Bisaccia became an interim head coach, and all of a sudden we're talking about him a lot. I feel like we'll be hearing more about your guys' names more for those teams in particular that succeed at this right away. I do want to talk a little bit about you over here and put you a little bit in the spotlight because, like I said, you've been doing this for a while. You've been coaching the NFL for over a decade now. You know, you were you got your start as an NFL coach. I believe it was in 2010 with the Dolphins. You really haven't looked back since. How did that job come up? Because before that, you were primarily in college.
Yeah, so Tony Sperano, God rest his soul, was one of my favorite people in the world, who has since passed. Tony, at the time, was the head coach of the Dolphins, and Tony's the one that got me my start in the NFL. He hired me as an assistant special teams coach with the Dolphins, and that actually was back in 2009. I became a coordinator in 2010. It was my first year as a coordinator, and that actually was a midseason. I got a midseason change. We made a midseason change there, and I got elevated to coordinator. But I had worked for Tony Sperano in college at the Division II level, and I was actually the head coach. Tony was at the University of New Haven. He had moved on. I became the head coach at the University of New Haven. He moved on to the NFL, was in the NFL for a while, became the head coach of the Dolphins. And so Tony's the one that gave me my start in the NFL. He's the one that got me down to the Dolphins. I was fortunate. I've been fortunate overall. I'm going on year 16 in the NFL, and I've only been with 2 teams. So I've been very, very fortunate in that regard. So I actually went through three regimes at the Dolphins: Tony Sperano, Joe Philbin, Adam Gase. In the interim, we had Todd Bowles and Dan Campbell. We're both interim head coaches. So I actually worked for 5 different head coaches there. When I left the Dolphins, ironically enough, Tony Sperano and Sean Payton had worked together at the Cowboys. They were very close. That's actually how I met Sean years ago through Tony. We all know how this networking works out in this profession, and so when I left the Dolphins and went to the Saints, I had a little bit of history with Sean Payton, not a ton, but Dan Campbell was in the building. Jeff Ireland, our assistant GM, had been the GM at the Dolphins. Those guys were very instrumental in helping me get to the Saints. And so that's kind of how my 2 stops have happened. So I became the coordinator at the Dolphins in 2010. I was a coordinator all the way through the 2018 season. And then I became the special teams coordinator in 2019 with the Saints. And then obviously Sean moved on, and Dennis Allen obviously came in, and he obviously kept me there as well. And so, like I said, I've been blessed. There's not a lot of coaches in the NFL that can say they've been 16 years and only 2 stops. So I'm very, very fortunate in that regard.
Definitely a big deal. I'm very into the entire coaching cycle every year, and I get calls about this all the time. And the one thing I tell people is, like, if there are people who have been at one place for a long time and that place had a lot of turnover, but that person happens to still stay there, it's usually a good sign about what the person is doing, not just only as a person, but also as a head coach. I think that probably also applies to you, Darren. You've been coaching, like I said, in the NFL for a while. You've been with 2 organizations. We attend events like the NFL Combine every year where young coaches aspire to break in. What is like your one piece of advice that you would give them whenever you see those type of people?
Well, it's very interesting. I have a son that's actually going to be a senior at the University of Texas, and he has aspirations of going into the coaching profession. Listen, I tell my own son this. So this is the advice I would give a young coach these days. I learned how to coach at the lower college levels. When I say that, I think it's very valuable experience for a young guy to go out and get his own room and coach players and, have to be able to make decisions on game day and be able to, manage the roster and make decisions. And when I was a young coach, I was very fortunate. I actually became a head coach at the age of 28. I was the youngest head coach in the NCAA, I think, for 2 years. I was a Division II head coach at New Haven, as I mentioned earlier. And I tell everybody that was the most valuable experience that I ever had because I didn't have a lot of staff. And I always tell people, if you can be a Division II head coach, you can do anything because you end up being the equipment guy, the travel guy, you're everybody. You're the trainer at times. You're you're a mentor, you're a doctor. You wear so many hats. You're a therapist, and so that is the advice that I would give young guys coming out. I think everybody has these aspirations of immediately going and getting into the NFL, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what can happen sometimes to young guys is they can get into a building and they're always coaching behind somebody. They're never really the voice in the room. They're never really hands-on with their own position group. And I just think there's a lot of value in learning how to coach at the lower levels and moving yourself up the ladder. And so, I would say, be patient. It doesn't have to happen overnight. I'm giving my son the same advice. My advice to him is, become a graduate assistant in college, work your way up, and if that means you have to go down to a lower level and coach your own position and do all those things, that's really how you learn how to actually coach the game. And I can sit here and say that, people have always said, I've been coaching special teams. This would be my, in college, I was in college for 16 years and I coached special teams for 15 of those. And now I'm going on year 16 in the NFL, and I've been coaching special teams. So this would be my 31st year, sound like an old man, 31st year coaching special teams. And I can tell you that I learned everything, all the fundamentals, the techniques, everything that I learned when I was a younger coach in college. And a lot of it's by trial and error. And there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. And so, I have a lot of respect for the coaches that take that path. It's not the path that everybody takes, but if I had to give a young guy advice, that's the advice that I would. And like I said, I'm giving it to my own son. So.
Fascinating stuff. All right, last one here. This is the NFL Spotlight Show. We want to put a spotlight on people like you for the work that you've done. You mentioned before you've been around many people. You've done a lot of networking over the years from meeting all these people, all these coaches. Is there anyone that you know who deserves to be in this seat in the future, and we get to hear from them?
Wow, that's a great. I love that question, and there's a lot of guys that pop into my mind. Listen, there's a lot of guys that have helped me over the years, and I've watched some guys rise through. I mentioned Dan Campbell. I mean, when I got to the Dolphins, Dan Campbell was a position coach, helping out with the tight ends, and watched him obviously become one of the better head coaches in our league. And I kind of love those stories of those guys that, like I mentioned earlier, methodically move up the chain. You put me on the spot here. There's about 20 guys that I would love to, that I think, probably don't get the credit that they deserve. I've worked with a lot of great people over the years, both at the Dolphins and with the Saints. The guys that come to mind are the guys that are the behind the scenes guys that, really don't get the credit. There's a lot of great offensive, defensive line coaches in our league. There's a lot of strength coaches that you never, ever hear of, in our league. Listen, I worked with a guy, Dave Paloka. He's one of the first guys that pops in my mind. He's the strength coach at the Dolphins. He's been there, I think, 17 years. He's a guy that Mike Tannenbaum knows well. You talk about a guy that's survived a lot of regimes. I mean, he's been there. He started with the Sperano regime, and he's been there since. So every head coach since Sperano. But a guy like that, who no one even knows who they are, but this guy's been just grinding at it for 17 years. Those are the people in my mind that deserve probably a lot more credit than they get. The strength coaches, they work with everybody. And then there's those special teams coaches, across the league. I mentioned some of the guys already, John Fossil and Richard Hightower, who I've been very fortunate to work on this project with. But not only them, there's a lot of great special teams coaches out there. The last couple of years, a guy like Frank Ross for the Houston Texans, not a household name, but Frank Ross has done as good of a job in the NFL the last 2 years on special teams. You could argue Houston's been, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, they've had the best units in the league. Not a lot of people know who Frank Ross is. I'm going to tell you, he's a big reason that Houston had a lot of the success they've had, and why they've become a playoff team. And so, those are a couple of guys. I know there's, like I said, there's a ton of guys. I could keep going on and on because I love that question.
Absolutely. I just want to let you know this is exactly what we are doing here with this show. It's really all those people, like, for example, we'll use the kickoff rule. I mean, like, everyone just sees the diagrams, they got approved and moved on. But like, you and John played a big role in, displaying it and going through all the headaches and talking to people and presenting it. And eventually, here we are, the season will kick off, and you guys played a big role in that. We want to bring those type of people on here. We always talk about GMs and head coaches. They all do amazing work. The people who work underneath them, then we never talk about. And you mentioned offensive line coaches, defensive line coaches, the salary cap guy, the strength and conditioning guy, all these people around the league, we never hear from them. And that's kind of what we're doing over here with this show, putting you guys in the spotlight for the amazing work that you do for this amazing league that keeps on booming every single year.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would be remiss if I don't mention one more guy, because my assistant, Phil Galliano, who's been with me now at the Saints for 6 years, this is a guy that really is going to be a very, very good special teams coordinator in this league. I'm surprised he's not one already. Another guy just doesn't get the credit that he deserves. But we've been fortunate at the Saints to be very good on special teams the last couple of years, and that's not just all because of me. This is the greatest team sport in the world. It takes other coaches. It takes great players. It takes and Phil is kind of the glue that kind of holds the thing together. I'm terrible at PowerPoints and video, and he's tremendous. He's not only that, but he's a tremendous teacher, a tremendous coach. He's gotten some interviews, but here's a guy that's he's going to be a phenomenal special teams coordinator in our league and deserves an opportunity. So there's another guy that I want to give a little bit of love to, because he probably doesn't get appreciated by me as much as he should.
We will definitely pass that along to him. Darren, I really want to thank you for making the time. Congrats again on getting the proposal passed, and best of luck this season with the Saints and what should be an exciting one.
Ari, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for having me on, and I look forward to seeing you in the future, my man.
Special thanks to Saints special teams coordinator Darren Rizzi for joining us here today on the NFL Spotlight Show. He is very well deserving of being on the show, not just for what he did with the kickoff rule and how he worked tirelessly this offseason to make it happen, and for him explaining everything here on the show was very nice. But this is really one of the most respected coaches in the NFL. And I don't say this lightly, because I do believe this. Like, when he was in Miami in his first NFL stint, it says a lot that he was there from Tony Sparano as a head coach to Joe Philbin as a head coach to Adam Gase as a head coach. Like, all these new head coaches come in, they usually bring in their own guys. All of them kept him on staff, which says a lot about him as a coach. And now in New Orleans, he's been there with Sean Payton. He's been there now with Dennis Allen, and he continues to be one of the best special teams coordinators in the NFL.